So, welcome to the fourth year of our program, Journey to Juneteenth. This year, we are focusing on the significant impact and experience of Black Americans in the military. My name is Dr. Juanita Dawson, and I am an Executive Council member and advisor with AARP in California. We are extremely happy to offer unique content to AARP members in California and beyond. AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people to choose how they live as they age and to age with confidence. With a nationwide presence, AARP strengthens communities and advocates for what matters most to the more than 100 million Americans 50 plus and their families, including health security, financial resilience, and social connections. In California, we're focused on developing livable communities for all ages. To learn more about the work AARP is doing at the national, state, and local levels, visit aarp.org/CA. That's aarp.org/CA. So before we get into the details of the day, we have a poll for you to participate in. So when you see the questions come up on your screen, please provide your answer. The polling should begin. First question, how many years have you participated in the Journey to Juneteenth program with the AARP California State Office? First time, all 4 years, not all 4 years, but more than once. And there's a second question, how familiar are you with the impact Black Americans have had in the military? Very aware, aware, or no clue? Antoine, are you ready to close?
Yes. Should be, I think the results are being shared.
Okay.
Do you all see them? I mean, do you see them, Dr. Juanita?
Uh, yes, I was trying to share the results. Let's see. For the first question, 75% of you said that this is your first time, and the other 25% said not all 4 years, but more than once. And for the second question, 100% said they were very aware with the impact Black Americans have had in the military. So thank you so much for participating in our quick poll questions. We'll go ahead and revisit another poll at the end of this event. So throughout the event today, we'll remind you to participate in the chat, and I see some of you have, where you can ask questions, share reactions, send shout outs to individuals you may know, and more. We're eager to hear and learn from Dr. Thanayi Jackson, who will help lead today's conversation. As some of you may recall, Dr. Jackson has helped lead our Juneteenth conversation the last 3 years. If you're interested in viewing those conversations, please check out AARP California YouTube account. You will see the link in the chat. Dr. Thanayi Jackson is a U.S. historian of the Civil War and Reconstruction. She focuses on the evolution of slavery and meanings of freedom. Dr. Jackson earned her PhD at the University of Maryland, College Park and is currently Assistant Professor of History at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She is a native of San Jose, California. So let's welcome Dr. Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson. Before I get started, I just want to call your attention to the chat again. We'll be sharing information related to military service. And for those who live outside the state or outside the areas relevant to the information, I encourage you to find a local organization delivering similar resources in your community. Okay, let's get started a bit today. Let me share my screen with you all. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the screen there of the image of the 13th Amendment right up there for us.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. The 13th Amendment, one of the things I want to do today is the past 4 years, we've focused on different things. The first year I gave an overview of what Juneteenth was and how the holiday came about. The second year we focused on community elections. The third year we focused on health in the Black community. And all of them have thought about the journey to Juneteenth, right? Like how to keep freedom alive. And how to focus on our communities. I do want to focus on the very first one I did today and give a super brief overview of the things I talked about in that one. One of the reasons is because I want to think about and remind us that Juneteenth is really a military holiday, and I'm not sure it gets enough credit for that. So the 13th Amendment officially abolishes slavery in the United States, but we celebrate Freedom Day, Juneteenth, on June 19th. Why? I'm going to give a quick refresher of the path to freedom from our first journey to Juneteenth so that I can again highlight why Juneteenth is a military holiday and a celebration of Black soldiers. There's this sort of misconception that Juneteenth marks the day when enslaved people in Texas finally learned that the Emancipation Proclamation had happened, that it somehow took more than 2 years for these people to know that they were, quote, free. That's not quite correct. I understand that that's become part of the larger mythology, but it's historically inaccurate. So let's talk about first what the Emancipation Proclamation did. The Emancipation Proclamation was a military warning of sorts. It was designed to force a surrender. So if you look at my slide here, on July 17, 1862, Lincoln first passed what's called the Militia Act, which some people also call the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. On July 17, 1862, the Militia Act makes it legal for Black men to serve in the Army. That's pretty big. It also was a moment where Lincoln says, if you don't come back into the fold, if you don't surrender now and rejoin the United States, then on January 1st, I'm going to issue an Emancipation Proclamation. Now, again, I think it's a genius military policy, but what does it actually do? I mean, for one thing, it doesn't apply to the slave states that are still in the Union. So these red states here, those states still have legal slavery and are still part of the United States. Emancipation Proclamation doesn't apply to them at all. It also doesn't apply to the states who are in rebellion, the gray states down there, right? So there's sort of an issue, right? Because it doesn't apply to the states that also do not recognize Lincoln as their president. So Lincoln doesn't really have any power there. They recognize Jefferson Davis as their president, right? So again, it is federal policy. It does include some, frameworks for emancipation, but it doesn't actually free anybody. So it's not that Juneteenth is when these people finally hear that they're free, because technically they're not free. But again, it is this sort of genius military policy. It does grant Black men the right to serve in the military. It also means that this threat has been issued. If you don't come back into the fold, if you don't surrender now, then I am going to free people who are enslaved by people who are in open rebellion. It's a sort of interesting way to go about it, right? It's not that it's necessarily confusing, but there's a path to freedom now that's been laid out. It does a few things. For one, now that Black people are able to serve in the military, the war may not have been about freedom to the majority of people before this thing happens. But now that you're inviting enslaved people and free Black people to serve, it's about freedom now. So again, for most soldiers, this war had not been about freedom before. It was about preserving the Union. But now it's about freedom because there are now hundreds of thousands of soldiers for whom it is absolutely crucial. For the majority of these soldiers, marching back home into the South means liberating friends and family. It means ending slavery. The other thing that gets set up by the Emancipation Proclamation, the real place that it has teeth, is every time you win, you free people, right? Again, the Emancipation Proclamation alone has no power to free anyone. It does not apply to the places where Lincoln has no power. The Confederacy does not recognize him as president, and they do not recognize US law. So for it to go into effect, you have to win. Every time you see one of these little dots, it's a Union victory. In many ways, every time you see one of these little dots, and these dates are really small down at the bottom. So at first, we're still in 1861 here. But by the time you get here to this preliminary emancipation moment, and then into the Emancipation Proclamation, now every time you see a victory, you're also seeing freedom. Most of these people in the beginning celebrated their own freedom days on the days that that occurred, right? Everywhere the Army wins, the soldiers bring freedom to that place. And that is now a sort of mini freedom day for each one of those places. These are actually pretty amazing, huge moments, right? I mean, if we think about it now, we're talking about Black soldiers marching back into the South as armies of liberation. And there's some really beautiful scenes that happen as a result of this. In February 1865, when the 4th United States Colored Infantry Regiment marched into Wilmington, North Carolina, the city came alive. Black Wilmingtonians knew that Black soldiers brought freedom. One man, nearly 93 years old, said he had been too weak to leave his house since the previous July, but the music of the Union troops had revived him. And he felt so happy that he came out, and there he stood with his long white locks and his wrinkled cheeks welcoming them. Sergeant John W. Pratt of the 30th United States Colored Infantry later wrote that he was speechless. All he could do was cry. We could then truly see what we had been fighting for, wrote Sergeant N.B. Sterling of the 39th United States Colored Infantry. In another incredible moment, one woman saw her own son for the first time since he had escaped slavery right there in the city. He marched back home into Wilmington with the 37th U.S. Colored Infantry. Another Black soldier described the scene in an article he wrote later. "There goes my son," exclaimed a lady. "Which one?" asked a corporal. "That one, just gone ahead." And sure enough, it was her son. She overtook him and embraced him, and how proudly she felt. None but those similarly situated can ever feel. Another soldier captured his own former master as a prisoner of war. According to an observer, the face of each man reflected his feelings beyond the power of words to express or pen to describe. After the Battle of Wilmington that I just talked about, in many ways was the final death knell to the war in the East. After that, it was hard for Robert E. Lee to supply his armies, and weeks later, he surrenders at Appomattox. But even though Appomattox is sort of considered by many to be the end of the war was not over yet. The Army of the Trans-Appalachian West in Texas continued to fight. The United States government sent troops west to end the war once and for all. And the images we see here of the 25th United States Colored Troops are soldiers that were sent to finish that fight and invade from the sea. On May 26, 1865, the Army of the Trans-Mississippi West surrenders. Another regiment, the 29th United States Colored Troops, made up of Midwesterners and recently liberated slaves, eventually anchored at Galveston, Texas on June 18th, and they officially announced United States victory. Meanwhile, remember from our first slide, this entire time, the 13th Amendment is being debated all across the United States. It had been ratified by Congress in January, and now it was up to the states to ratify this thing, which would eventually happen in December of that same year. So the actions of Black soldiers are politically influencing white voters' opinions on the fate of slavery. It had not been abolished by the Emancipation Proclamation. On June 19th, after this military victory in Texas, headquarters and the District of Texas in Galveston announced the abolition of slavery as a result of military defeat, which included these liberating Black soldiers. It's not that enslaved people in 1865 Texas didn't know that they had been freed, because they hadn't been. The Emancipation Proclamation had not freed them in 1863. It had not abolished slavery. For the Emancipation Proclamation to apply to any enslaved people in the then Confederacy, the Army had to win and reclaim that land as part of the United States of America. And in June of 1865, these men of the 31st United States Colored Troops were part of the last soldiers of the Civil War to do that. They had been at the Wilderness, the Battle of Cold Harbor, Petersburg, and Richmond. They were at Appomattox on April 9th, and in June, they too liberated Texas, ending slavery there, the last bastion of the Confederacy. Y'all, Juneteenth is a military holiday. Let me end this slideshow and welcome our panel. Okay, thank you everybody for going through my recap with me there for the how Juneteenth is, I always argue, actually a military holiday, because it really was dependent on Union victory in making it take place. And I also think that, you know, Black soldiers don't quite often get as much recognition as they should for ending slavery, knowing that this is a military holiday, that this was a military act, that in order in many ways for the 13th Amendment to even be ratified, these victories by Black soldiers were proving to people that we too are American. Okay, I would love to welcome my panel. I'm really excited to do that because today we have veterans to talk to. And so they're really going to help enrich our conversation on this Black military story. I also want to remind us that AARP remains focused on livable communities for all ages and across all communities. Okay, to help us with the rest of our discussion, we are joined by two veterans who have significant impact in the veterans community. First, let me welcome Michael Dolphin, who wears many hats, but today he will be focusing on repping the veteran community. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. What an opportunity for this discussion. I'm a Vietnam era vet, and as you know, my name is Michael Dolphin. And for 45 years, I've served in the workforce development community. And when I first started my career more years ago than I want to admit, I was a veteran employment representative at a local office in Los Angeles, and ultimately became the division chief of workforce development for the Employment Development Department. And sorry about that. Most proudly, throughout my career, I've served on a number of boards and panels representing veterans across the United States, and I'm honored to be able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And next, I'm happy to welcome Sterling Barbour, Veteran Advocacy Group of America. Welcome, Sterling.
Well, thank you. Again, my name is Sterling Barbour. I'm a Vietnam era veteran, served as a sergeant in the United States Army from 1969 through 1971. We operate two businesses. One, of course, is what was stated, was Veteran Advocacy Group of America. It's a 501c3 veteran organization that helps our veterans with benefits. We also we collaborate with other VSOs. You know, if you work together as a team, you can achieve more. We have served over 5,000 Thanksgiving dinners to our veterans and have given out over 8,000 backpacks full of supplies to our veterans' kids to ensure they go to school and learn what they need to learn. We also have Revolution National Pest Council. It's a vocational school that teaches veterans how to get into the pest control industry. We give them state licenses, and more important, we place them in career opportunities. We also proud that we have won the Department of Labor, they call the Hire Vets Medallion Platinum Award 6 years in a row. That award is based on hiring our veterans and retaining our veterans. And we are one of 45 companies that have ever won that award. And I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to AARP for inviting me to this great event. I think this information is power, and sharing this information about Juneteenth is something that we really need to do to the communities and really to update all. And again, thank you and glad to be here.
Thank you both so much. I want to thank you both for your service and all the work you do for the community and veterans today. I'm really excited to have you here and talk to you all. I'm happy to start with some questions, and I want to encourage everybody to add questions to the chat if you have questions you want to add or want to join in the conversation. And I'll get us started. One of the things I wanted to get across in my recap is how significant Black military service has been. And at the same time, in my opinion, how little credit Black military service gets sometimes in United States history for some of the important roles. One question we've been thinking about is, there are several narratives or hidden stories about Blacks in the military. Red tails, buffalo soldiers. So how do we begin to dismantle these generational narratives that can be traced back to pre and post June 19th, 1865?
Tough question. I guess
Starting with the hard ones.
Of course it is. I'm going to be honest. There's at least from my point of view, which is the only one I can give. One of the things that's been very obvious for those of us who are Black men and Black women is looking to the military as our, for lack of a better term, our point of salvation. It was our opportunity to get to be able to get and to reach some of the opportunities that might not have been available to us as citizens, including education, training, some degree of some degree of being able to reach out and learn how to depend on others and be responsive to others, and develop our own personal responsibilities. One of the things I'll always say that I can't deny about my own military service, it helped me grow up very quickly. And I don't think that has changed over these years, over these last few hundred years. I think it is still primarily the same. It was an escape to salvation. That's the best term that I can think of at the moment. I mean, then and now.
Well said.
Yeah, and I would like to add, I think Mike hit a very important point. Back when I guess Mike and I went in almost the same time in the late 60s, it was a way to get out the neighborhood. It was a way to get educated. During that time, of course, college was available, but for a lot of us, we couldn't afford it, and the military was our education. Yeah. The military was a way to become educated in the sense of traveling, get educated in the sense of meeting other people, meeting other diversity, individuals with different backgrounds and things of that sort. So it was a learning platform, but at the same time, it was a challenging platform because, at the same time, we all know in the 60s and 70s, we wasn't treated the best. So, we had to deal with whatever was on our mind, and the military was a way that you had to do what you had to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think that you all both enlisted, served in the late 60s, early 70s. Do you think in your experience, recent experience with veterans, current soldiers, I mean, do you think that they join for the same reasons? Do you think that there's still some of that same past influencing the current day about Black military service?
Oh, I absolutely think so. But it's, how can I term this? It's with great hope for a variety of reasons. And of course, we know that there are a variety of reasons for going on. That escape that I talked about from your current circumstance, get out of your neighborhood, not join a gang, maybe because your probation officer told you you had to go. Any of those things, but still the expectation was that in the military, at the very least, the expectation. In the military, at the very least, you had opportunity. What was hard for a lot of us was maybe some restricted opportunity during our service. And I think that exists in life. And the hard part for us is to figure out how do you take that and how do you get beyond that? And there are other ways of doing it. Some of it is upon us personally, even with faced with organizational challenges that happen that way. But I think the hardest part of veterans is leaving the military and expecting that you're going to get what you were supposed to get. And most of that is respectful treatment and access, particularly, and most particularly on those who need the promises of medical care, those who need, the PTSD is a real thing. I mean, the mental toll upon the human brain is extraordinary depending on your assignment. But you expect to get that help. What I blame the military for, what I challenge the military for, is that my first 7 days in the military were totally spent in a psychological exercise that told me I'm no longer a civilian, I'm a soldier, and it's okay to kill somebody. And it's okay to remember to forget the 10 commandments.
Wow.
Because in the military, they don't apply. They don't apply. You can take a gun and you can go out and shoot somebody you don't know.
Wow.
Or as Bill Withers said in a song I reference a lot, somebody done shot me, some man I done never seen before, and nobody I never done nothing to. And the military spends a lot of time is getting you to that frame of mind. And then when they let you go, they just kind of drop you. You're done. We're done with you. And it might be a 2-day, what's called a TAP program, but the TAP program is mostly directed toward officers, not to the grunts. And that's where we really have our issues. And that is, and as much as we keep referencing to now, because that's what we've lived, I don't think it's been that much different since inception. We took care of you while we fed you every day. You got weapons, you had a place to sleep. You got some degree of medical assistance. When I got cut in the face and wounded in my arm during my military service, they sewed me up right there on the spot and sent me right back out. I never saw a hospital. But there are still these levels of success, I think, that are built in other ways that it's very difficult to think. I mean, I shouldn't say difficult to talk about, but in my view, I think there's one level of success in being able to attain leadership positions in the military. Black men and women in the military are well above the national average of demographics, well above. In the military, I believe it's somewhere around 28, 29%, if I remember correctly. While across the country, we're at 18 or 19. But we wind up mostly in leadership positions, even if you achieve rank as a captain, general, colonel, whatever the case may be, if they're leadership positions and command positions, the difficulty for us still is being able to get into policy positions. Only a couple of generals in the past years, Colin Powell being one of them, have been a part of that policy think tank. I have not been able to, I've always wanted to find out what the demographics are at the Pentagon, but I've never been able to find that out. I can find male, female demographics, but not at least in terms who's there making policy decision for the military and how it affects us. But we can command a group of people. We make good leaderships. We make good captains. We make good, battalion commanders when we're about to lead a march out into, enemy territory.
That's deep. It really is. Sterling, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I'd like to add, the difference is when I went into the service in 1969, I was drafted. So of course, they don't have the draft anymore. So now when we came up, you didn't have a choice. And especially during wartime, you had to go, whether you was in school or married. And of course, being a Black man, I was married and I was in school and I still got drafted, but a lot of people that were other than Black, they got the deferment. So we didn't get the deferment. We went into the military. And something else you got to think about, we're 18 years old. So how do a person 18 years old, you got to change his or her mind to become warriors. And like Mike was talking about, you had to go to battle. And did that affect you? Of course it did. And also, a lot of people don't realize back with the Vietnam veterans, we couldn't wear our uniforms in the airports and travel because people thought we were crazy. So there's a big difference in the respect that the veterans get today versus what we got back in the 60s and 70s. But at the same time, we had to adjust. The old saying, you adjust, adapt, or die. So of course we had to adjust to the situation because we wanted survival and we wanted to make the best of what we had to deal with. And yes, getting ranked helped a little bit, but at the same time, you were not treated the same. And I think veterans now have a little bit difference, but I guarantee you can go through stories of minorities in the military and they got stories of things that shouldn't have occurred that is still occurring. But the goal is for us to have platforms like this to change the way people think and to address issues that need to be addressed.
Each of you have said some things that have really struck me and stood out. One, Michael talking about how many people are in policy positions, right? I think that disparity, we should know about that, right? That's something that we should talk about more. And I think that even, I'm a history professor, and I had never connected the dots to something that Sterling's saying about, Black soldiers not getting deferment in the Vietnam War, right? I'll just march on teaching that if you were married and in school, you got a deferment, but that we don't know these, sort of embedded histories that disparities that not only happen then, but that continue. I just find it really powerful. Why do you, this might be, maybe I'm asking too big a question, but I just want to know what y'all think. Why don't we know this stuff? Why don't we, I will teach it from now on, but why isn't that on our minds? Why don't we see it? Why isn't it obvious? And again, maybe I'm getting too philosophical, but I'm just curious what you think.
I think at any moment in time, there are just things we've experienced more than learned, which are, in my view, are two different things.
You're right.
My favorite mentor used to say to me, he said, "Don't forget, I've already been your age. You should listen."
Yeah.
And that's not going to come out of a classroom.
Right.
And it was different for a lot of us. It was different for a lot of us, circumstantially, depending on where you were, what your assignment was, those kinds of things. But some things didn't matter no matter where you were. Command positions, policy decisions, how you were treated, maybe Maybe you're in the wrong assignment. Maybe you're, maybe your home base was not the happiest place to be. At Fort Ord, which is up in Monterey, Carmel,
Yeah.
which is where I was stationed for a while. It was not unusual for Black men to be beat up all the time on Broadway in Fremont. It was kind of a normal thing, you know. As much as we think about California being, the flower children and everything else. But a lot of that was circumstantial, little things when you went into town or you didn't go into town, or even epiphanies that happen in the foxhole. I had a sergeant who was an avowed Mississippi redneck until after a few months in the foxhole. Completely changed his mind. Became a dear friend. Because it's hard when you're depending on somebody else to watch your back. So I think all of us here, including I'm sure some people in the chat, have their own personal stories, but there are things that they can see that weren't quite right. One of the things, whether we wanted to be in the military or not, once we were there were expectations put into place. At least I'm going to get this. At least I can get a college education. At least when I can buy a house. I can buy a 2-bedroom house and raise my family with the GI Bill. And I can get medical services. All these kinds of things are promised, not always delivered, but that didn't happen until, we've been on the street for a while. Immediately, some things you were able to get, but how far back that goes is probably back to the beginning. And there are always promises made. I mean, how else do you get a group of people who are dedicated to the mission? To get people dedicated to the mission, you promise them just rewards. And it's not that we're untrusting or trusting. It's not that we're trusting souls. It's that we're here. We don't have a lot of choice. But at the very least, we have this to look forward to. And I'm certain, even with some of the research, as well as you've done and looked about, that's existed from the beginning of we were willing to accept Black folks into the military. And then our country has not always delivered. And I want to be fair. And it's not just Black folks. It's not just Black folks. In the last couple of years, I've worked with Major General Tony Taguda and about some of the atrocities that helped with Philippine Americans during World War II, who were conscripted into the military, but never received their benefits since World War II.
Wow.
And just now being recognized, and that, and I strongly suggest that Tony Taguda is an amazing person and has done a ton of work for Philippine Americans and their participation as well in the military. But it's not so unusual. It's our country. And I'm not shooting arrows at our country. It is what it is. And in whatever circumstances got us to why we're so different in so many ways, it is what it is. I'd rather know what's coming than to have too much faith and things are going to get better.
Wow.
Hey, I would like to add just a little bit on that. And again, things occurred. We talking about, us 2 Black men in the military. Just think about what the female soldiers went through. Their story is appalling in a lot of cases. If you ever talk to a female veteran, a lot of female veterans don't even want to talk about it, just like a lot of us men don't want to talk about our story. And that's why our story is really told and not told. Half of us will talk about it, but the majority of us don't really want to relive the things that we went through. So I think today's veterans, it was some changes, but when the Iraq and all that other stuff, it started back again from Vietnam. Vietnam was worse, of course, but I think with the Iraq war and Afghanistan, things changed a little bit. but still they went through the same crisis we went through. So, and some people say, well, what can we do about it? Well, doing things like this, I think really help. We have to talk about it. We got to educate people about it. We got to tell the Black history story that's really not told the way it should be at times. But by us getting involved in communities, and thanks to AARP for doing this, let's hope that we can educate more and get them to understand what happened then and what should happen now. And that's how we need to proceed, I believe.
I love that, and I'll add to that. And thank you for opening that door, Sterling. We've got to practice celebrating each other more. We spend a lot of time pointing fingers in other directions. We can spend that time celebrating what we've done and what our accomplishments have been, and not blaming it on somebody else. I mean, we could, but at some point, why bother, other than elevating who we are and celebrating each other? Since the Tuskegee Airmen, I know there have been a lot of wonderful things that have happened, but we don't have a current generation of the Tuskegee Airmen, and I think there are only 4 of them still alive.
Yes.
Then what do we celebrate? Who do we look forward to? I mean, who do they do movies on, and what banners go up all over town, and all these, you know, public relations things about the Tuskegee Airmen, and there's a dinner and there's a celebration, and it's their 79th birthday, and yada, 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 yada. But when the Tuskegee Airmen are gone, they become a part of past history. And then I think the honest question we should ask is, well, what happened since then? And why aren't we celebrating and supporting, you know, throughout our continued, our history isn't done yet. We still got tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. And as wonderful as history is, we also have to build in those opportunities, one, to learn from it, to recover from it, and pick out the parts that will mean something to us going forward, and connecting the dots, as I always like to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Whew, y'all, this is a lot. This is a lot. This is good stuff.
You asked the question.
I did. I know. I set myself up.
We just trying to give an answer.
I know. I mean, I agree. And there's I'm noticing in the chat, people are bringing up the Montford Point Marines, other different examples of folks who should be celebrated. What do y'all think? Stories of, you know, Black military service that should be celebrated going forward. Any favorites you want to give a shout out to, aside from present company, of course? Like right here, I mean, we're doing a celebration right here. I want to just point out, and both of you being here is super special. Any stories you want to share or point out for celebration? Not to put you on the spot, but I just thought I would open it up for any of your favorites, any of your inspirational.
I think we've had some soldiers who've done wonderful things of recent times. Colin Powell, for example. You know, it's kind of interesting because the whole Colin Powell celebration has come and gone.
Yeah.
You know, he's no longer Secretary of Defense. He's come and gone, and who talks about Colin Powell anymore? A few of us will. Dr. Dawson and I might have a conversation, bring it up, and a couple of other people. But it's kind of like that was then, and I think our real issue is this is now.
Yeah.
We need to learn from that. We need to look at those examples, and General Benjamin Davis, who's been celebrated, you know, throughout the country, and his name exists on it. I know that even in Compton, which has in Compton, California, there's a elementary school that had his name, and there was a great big celebration when it opened. And now 20 years later, you know, the school has fallen apart and everything else. And you ask around the neighborhood, do you know who Benjamin Davis was? No. You know, and that's some of the reality I think that we need to kind of figure ways to do more often, There are, you know, and I'm glad, thank you for someone mentioning the Montford Point Marines. That history is important as a building block. And it's not that we can't go back. We need to move, we have to move forward. But part of that building block is exactly that. What did we learn, and what do we do it, and what do we do now? What, so what, and now what?
I love that. I love that.
And, you know, just looking at the chat, you know, the chat is bringing up some nice stories, you know, the 866 Regiment of All Black Female. I mean, you know, there are a lot of great stories out there. Do we know about it? I would say no. But the great thing about it, let's talk about it. Let's educate it. You know, let's put things in writing so it can go down. You know, schools is changing so much now. They're saying that you can't say this, you can't show this, you can't read this. But what is America is about? You know, it's about our history and our Black history. We have to teach it ourselves. So, you know, we need to change the platforms and educate everyone about what we have done, what other people have done, and just make it a group effort so we all can learn from each other. That's the key. But again, we want to celebrate Juneteenth too.
It's a military holiday.
Hey, that's right. Hey, love is where love is, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you all so much. We got a couple more questions I don't want to leave out here. That's such a great conversation. I want to make sure that we get to talking about resources that are available for veterans now. So if you could share with us some of the resources available for veterans and how people can access them. And I know that they're going to be popping some of this stuff in the chat as well. But I want to make sure we get to taking care of current veterans too.
I can do a little bit of that since I was on the executive council for the last 6 years. And I have been totally impressed by the work the AARP does and the staff does. You know, they have just totally blown my mind more than once. And of course, as an organization, AARP has this tremendous reach out. They made this commitment to serving veterans, and they develop tools. And I'll talk about some of the tools in a moment, but the thing that I have found for today's veterans is the actual connection to connect the dots is probably the most difficult thing for them to do. We got medical facilities, we have served organizations that serve the homeless, and organizations that provide housing, and organizations that help with mental health, and organizations that help in their local communities. And there are lots and lots and lots of them, so much so that the analogy that's always in my head is that you drop them off in a very, very busy intersection, and there are 20 buses going around in circles. The hardest part is to figure out which one do I take?
Right.
Because frustration starts when they wind up in the wrong place.
Right.
And that's where frustration really starts with veterans. I mean, we can't replace the VA for all the horrible things that have not gone right with the VA. Also, remember, it's such an organization that there are a lot of things that do go right. But it's like the other part, it's just human nature. The things that don't go right get all the tea. But at the same time, there are organizations that help, and there are veteran advocates out there, and AARP being among them. There's a mental and emotional health support pocket guide for veteran military family caregivers, as well as a military caregiving guide. And this has probably been the most impactful for me personally over the last few years, even maybe so because of the circumstances with my stepfather, who was in the military, and my mom, is to understand the difficulties that address caregivers themselves. I've really started to understand the term better of emotional fatigue, or actually caregiving fatigue.
Absolutely.
And what that puts on us as well. But these wonderful guys are out there. I think they're really, really good. The Comprehensive Guide for Job Search, the organizations that are out there, the guide that reaches out to veterans about scams and fraud. And there have been a couple of leaders in California who've done a lot in that. The Veterans Burial Benefits Guide is also a very, very good piece. And I will say that one of the things I really love about all these publications, they're written in everyday language and not bureaucratese, as some of us may know. If you go to the, if I'm, and I'm not kicking them down the road, but if you go to the VA Military Guide on Burial, there's a lot of stuff that you have to get through. It is just what it is. There is a process, but some of the materials that ARP has provided for these military resources, I think, are just wonderful. I think that every chance that we get, we should drop 1,000 copies everywhere. And then the hardest part for us of all is convincing people, dig a little deeper, this stuff is there, and take use of it. It's there, it's free, it doesn't cost anything, and it has value, and share it with someone. More than anything else, share it with someone else.
And I would like to add I use the AARP cheat sheet. I like short versions, and most veterans are like me. They want just the facts. You give us a lot to read. A lot of time we overlook it, but just the short cheat sheet is good to have. But I think the first thing I like to do when I try to talk to veterans about what he or she might need is first I want to listen to them, because a lot of times veterans get frustrated because people don't want to listen. So I kind of listen to them and read what they're talking about, and then I kind of communicate what I see could be beneficial to them. I think all veterans need to go on the VA site and register on e-benefits. E-benefits open up a lot of doors. It tells them about housing. It tells them about education. It tells them about apprenticeship. It gives a lot about benefits, because like Mike was saying earlier, a lot of veterans still haven't applied for benefits. It helps them with benefits. Also, I like to talk about, there are VSOs, Veteran Service Organizations, that's out there, Goodwill, Salvation Army, JBS, US Vets has a big footprint that does a lot, especially they all over. But if you look at Southern California, you look at the Inglewood or the location in Long Beach, I mean, they do a lot for our veterans and their families. I think taking care of mental health, there's those hotlines got to be there, because we know the #1 suicidal is veterans, the #1 homeless is veterans, and the #1 unemployed. So we got to open up these resources and educate our veterans that there are benefits out there. And you'd be surprised, today there are a lot of veterans don't know where he or she should turn the corner or what that's available for them. And again, it's got to be educate, educate, and educate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of those resources. Do you think it's difficult to get veterans to reach out for help sometimes? Do you think it's the muddled nature of the system, or do you think it's part of what you both kind of talked about earlier, right? Just the entering the service and sort of being, taught, as you say, when you first went in, that you don't need help, kind of thing, in that way from outsiders. Do you think that it's difficult to get veterans to reach out for assistance? And how do we overcome that?
A good question. I think there's a certain level of disappointment, and that holds some veterans back, because I've given my life, and by the way, and I've always said military families serve as well as the veterans do. They've given up their mate, they've given up their dad, they've given up their household earner while that person is serving in the military. There might be a little bit of reward if you have a place where you can travel with your family and travel with your veteran, of course, but in some ways they're serving just as well. But I think our expectation, at least my expectation, was that I've earned more than I got. And that little bit of frustration and expectation and not having that met, kind of meant, well, some things I have to do on my own. that I can't depend on the people who promised, this, and I'm not being too political this way, but I mean, our country promised a lot. And I think probably to veterans that more of our population was promised the reward of being a veteran than any other group of folks in history, and then didn't deliver. And that's frustrating to a lot of veterans who thought, I'm going to be okay this time. I'm going to be all right this time. And then that reluctance to just go out and grab what's yours may have something to do with it as well. Or putting it aside to some degree. I'll admit that when I came back from the military, I put it aside for many years. I burned my uniform. I burned everything when I got home. And I didn't talk about it. The only time I ever put down there as a veteran, so I was applying for a government job. And this is one of the questions. But I felt like I needed to do what I needed to do for myself because it wasn't going to happen if I waited for it. That may be some of the reluctance and where some of our veterans got themselves into a hole, and then were not able to dig out of that hole. It didn't get better, it got worse. There may be more in that from an academic point of view, but I don't know. That's just kind of how I see it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think also, as veterans, we wrote a blank check to our country. And that blank check means that whatever you said, we did. There was no question asked. We just did it. And if you look back of the veterans from our time, of course, our story is different from the veterans today. I think being us old veterans, we had we were more proud. We didn't want to ask, not understanding. You're not asking, this is what you deserve. Yeah. We didn't understand that. And I waited 55 years before I put in any kind of a benefits. I mean, can you imagine waiting 55 years? Thinking that one, you put in your benefits, you get turned down, you get frustrated, and you say the heck with it. You'd be surprised the amount of veterans that go through. You got to be turned down in the military. I hate to say it, 2 or 3 times before you can get benefits. And what person is going to go through that frustration? The advantage of today, our young people are a little bit more educated than what we were back then. They understand the online better. They can research information. There's people that can help you put in benefits now. Back then, there was nobody helping you. You put it in yourself and you got denied. Now there's resources out there to help our veterans. So the veterans of today, if you look at the amount of veterans today getting benefits, that number is astronomical compared to what happened when us Vietnam or World War II guys was getting benefits. We wasn't getting them. You could count it. Now the numbers is astronomical who's getting benefits, which is great because they deserve it. We deserve it.
Wow. Thank you both so much. All right, I'm going to ask the last question. I want to remind everybody that there's going to be a chance for audience questions. After I'm done, I'll turn it over to the audience to be able to engage our panel. All right, if you could use one word to describe the impact of Black Americans in the military, what word would you use and why?
Well, I'm gonna start this off, and I'm gonna be a little greedy if you don't mind.
Of course, you earned it.
Sometimes one word is not a word enough. But I want to say, trailblazing, number one.
Oh, I love it.
Black Americans have been pioneers, breaking barriers and setting new procedures. From the Buffalo Soldiers to the Tuskegee Airmen, we have paved the way for greater inclusion and recognition within the armed forces. My number 2 word is resilience. Despite facing systematic racism and discrimination, Black soldiers have shown incredible strength and perseverance because we had to, Their in our enduring spirit not only contribute to military success, which we have done a lot through all the stories that we know of these great veterans, battalions or services, but also advance civil rights and social justices. We have changed the market. It's not changing fast enough, but it's changing. And that's what we all need. We got to accept change and we got to work on change. So those are my 2 words.
I love it. Thank you.
Gee, that's been it. I've been thinking about that question over and over and over and over and over again, and it's difficult. I think the one I'm going to use is as a phrase, eye-opening.
Nice.
On both sides of the equation, as a veteran in the service, and the challenges that become apparent pretty quickly. But also to some people who come to regard us in a different way because they get to see who we are. They get to see us in the toughest of circumstances. And probably for a lot of our fellow soldiers who aren't Black, their first opportunity to rely on us and to find out that it's a worthwhile effort to be able to do that. I have seen the result of that in just in so many ways. People who may not have seen you in the same way before the military. So I'd say eye-opening from both sides of the equation.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. I wish we had more time. I could talk to y'all about military history and Black military service all day, I swear. But I want to thank you both for your service. And I really want to thank you both for speaking with us so openly and honestly today. Just really beautiful conversation. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to the audience here so that they can have the pleasure of engaging you all as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson. And thank you to the panelists. We do have a few questions in the chat, and we'll start with one from Ishi. Why don't they teach the real American history in public school? This to the panelists, or
there are a dozen questions around that. Some of it politics, a lot of it politics. Some of it, because I think the one thing that really stands out for me, even more in generations, and my granddaughters are great examples. They're hungry for knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's different in this generation is their ability to absorb information is humongous. I mean, there's no reason that children should be, well, I shouldn't say there's no reason, but their curiosity is out there. And only in some areas, I think our education is beginning to understand that they're ready to absorb it. Feed it to them. Feed them as much as you can because they're willing to take it in. But along the line somewhere saying, well, this is too much and that's too much. And we only have time for this and we only had time for that.
Mm-hmm.
So some of it is the pedagogy of education and some of it is politics, when in some areas there are states that don't want to talk about it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And then we have another couple of questions here. Anne Marie, what is the data regarding gerontologists? I have encountered one on TikTok.
I have no clue.
Neither do I.
Me neither.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that from AARP standpoint. Any data on gerontologists, we'll have to look that up. The other is about educating veterans. How can we educate veterans? That's a role that can be fulfilled remotely. What is that role that can be fulfilled remotely? Phone, email, text. Do you know of any job openings? And I think we have given some resources in the chat. But if panelists and Dr. Jackson, if you have other resources that you want to mention?
I like to,
There are, well, Sterling, why don't you go first? Because I know you know some of the same answers.
uh, thanks to today, there are a lot of things that's open for our veterans. I belong to an organization called Pest Vets. It's a national organization throughout the country. It's over probably 18,000 companies that's involved in our organization. And what we do is we educate companies about the benefits of hiring veterans. And then we reach out to veterans in a platform, whether it's through the Skill Bridge program or whether it's just through the military service itself or by advertising, by getting veterans aware about opportunities. But more important, you got to educate the employers. The veterans we want a job, we want a career. But a lot of employers, don't know how to handle some of us veterans. So we got to educate the veterans, and that's one of the things that Pest Vets do. If you local in Southern California is U.S. Vets. They do a lot, not only to house our veterans, but also to educate them, let them know about opportunities that's available. And the other VS service centers throughout the country, they have open house or they do open times that veterans can come in and learn information about what's available for them, because that's what people want to hear. And I also got to give a shout out to Cal Vets. They do an outstanding job in California educating our veterans about home ownership, about finances. So, there's a lot of great things, but again, it's putting that information out to our veterans so they can be aware of it. That's the key, is getting that information out to them. And these organizations really do a great outreach to make it happen.
And I would agree with the same thing. And thank you, Mr. Barbour, for saying such nice things about U.S. Vets. I was on their national board of directors for 11 years.
They do great things
during my career, and they do some wonderful things. The education part is absolutely vital. And I think one of the things is that we just got to get it out more. I mean, it's there. There's no lack of information anyplace. It's communicating it that really is done. And sometimes in really open terms, throughout, and one of the references I made earlier is throughout military service, they spend a lot of money in helping you become a warrior and a lot of psychological input into helping you become a warrior. They spend almost nothing in helping you return to civilian life and being able to get back into civilian life and and return to civilian life, including even something so simple as understanding how to describe your military occupation in a civilian sense and where does it fit in a civilian sense. One of the things a lot of veterans look to, because it's the closest thing to their military service, is law enforcement. There are a lot of veterans in law enforcement, but that's primarily because it has to do with guns and rifles and violence to some degree. But to be able to take some of those other skills and turn them into equivalent skill civilian jobs is one of the most difficult pieces of it.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What a great event. So much to think about related to history, support, resources related to military service. So we're going to go ahead and put up our last poll for the afternoon. Let's see. I believe we're going to put, yes, we did. The first two questions that we didn't give enough time, I think, are there. How many years have you participated in the Journey to Juneteenth program with the AARP California State Office? How familiar are you with the impact Black Americans have had in the military? And then our last poll question, did you learn more about supports and resources to assist veterans? So let's see. Antoine, let me know. And
Yes. Somehow it got ended early again. We apologize for that, but
oh,
yeah, so let's do this. We'll relaunch the poll and then give folks an opportunity to spend some time answering the question. So we just relaunched it again. So
Mhm.
go ahead and vote, and we'll leave it up for 35 or 40 seconds. That should give folks enough time to channel through all three questions. Sorry about that,
Oh,
everybody.
okay. Okay, yeah, I see it running through right now. So that's good. But yes, so as we do that, I will, oh, the poll did end, huh? Oh, no, it's not ending yet.
Not yet. We still got about
Okay.
5 or 7 more seconds, and we'll close it.
Okay. Okay, great, great.
Yep. 5 more seconds, everybody. So hurry up and click, click, click.
Yes, yes, please do, please do.
All right, and we're ending it in 3, 2, 1.
All right.
There we go.
Okay, great, great, great. Okay. So the how many years have you participated? Okay, we have first timers 84%, all 4 years 6%, and not at all but more than once 10%. Then for the second question, how familiar are you with the impact Black Americans have had in the military? Very aware 18%, aware 71%, and no clue 11%. And the last question, did you learn more about support and resources to assist veterans? And that answer was a 96% yes. So thank you. And I really hope that you enjoyed today as much as I did. And make sure you check out the chat for a link to the list of activities, resources you can use to support veterans. And in a few days, you'll receive an email from us that will include a link to a survey for this event. And we ask that you do provide us with your feedback, which will help us when we create future events for you. Also, visit our page at aarp.org/CA to assess our events calendar and learn about future activities. We hope you continue to engage with us by attending more events or even volunteering with us if you are interested. Thank you again to our moderator, Dr. Jackson, our guest panel, veterans Michael Dolphin and Sterling Barbour. Sorry, our staff, Marissa Guzzardo, Atisha Jones, and Antoine Cook, volunteer Connie Moore, and you, our AARP audience, for attending. Have a great rest of your day. And in the words of Mr. Dolphin, let's celebrate us more. And in Mr. Barber's words, let's continue to be trailblazers. So thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.